Starfield, more like Barfield, more like Garfield, more like Chris Pratt. So the Game Awards recently announced their Game of the Year nominees, and something spicy that's been floating around the internet is the fact that Starfield was not even nominated. I personally don't disagree because Starfield is the Raisin Bran of AAA video games. It's something that, unlike many on the internet, I can't say I was all too excited for before launch, and after playing for around 15 hours, I found that time I had spent almost entirely hollow. That's not to say the game is entirely garbage. I actually really love the gunplay and a lot of the music and general vibe, but overall it's definitely disappointing. I think Starfield, in summary, tried to be too many things. So for this video, I'd like to talk a bit about the different games Starfield attempted to be and why that fusion didn't work. The games I'll be drawing comparisons to include Skyrim, Fallout 4, No Man's Sky, and Fallout New Vegas. As a brief personal note, I recently started an 8-to-5 job and the Game Awards is tomorrow at the time of recording, so this video is very lightly edited compared to my usual content because I just don't have the time. If you watch this video and you enjoy what I have to say, consider checking out my other stuff. You can watch literally everything I've uploaded in the last 3 years in the same amount of time it will take to watch this. So I want to include the comparison to Skyrim first, especially because Skyrim has been used as basically a litmus test for every open world game to come out since its release. If a game is open world, inevitably it will be compared to Skyrim, and I think that's for good reason. Skyrim is not the best open world game ever made, or even the most detailed, or even the most fun, but it managed to strike a balance between a huge environment hastily made for the sake of having a huge environment to explore, and enough humanity in the form of quests individually voice acted with unique names, unique stories, basically things that maybe didn't matter but at least were unique and gave you the illusion that you're doing something fresh with every new quest. I think this immediately draws attention to Starfield's biggest flaw. Skyrim is known as a game where you can just pick a direction and go there and you will experience something new and fun. The difference is in Starfield, you begin to see the cracks in the form of repeated content. See, Starfield makes liberal use of pre-generated environments which are randomly placed throughout the game, with human intervention only occurring for main quests and some side quests. What this means is everything experienced outside of those main quests is entirely self-contained, and the content in those pre-generated environments needs to be generic enough it won't cause any conflicts anywhere that it's generated. In Skyrim, you will encounter plenty of locations that are self-contained, but they still maintain a unique identity. There are some lazier examples, such as the mini caves that don't have much of a story beyond, oh, this is that ice region, there's ice trolls here. But even something as little as that can be important to world building. In Starfield, you might find a camp run by robots, but that doesn't signify that it's a robot world or that this robot camp has had any impact on the world it's on. And that's just drawing a comparison between one of the worst aspects of Skyrim's world building and unique sense of identity. There are plenty of random locations that carry an even more memorable experience in the form of something unique. Basically, right off the bat, Starfield fails to compete with even the worst parts of Skyrim. Oh, and just for the record, every cave I have ever been inside of in Starfield has been a humongous waste of time. I've yet to find a cave that has even a single enemy or something valuable. I genuinely don't know why they're in the game. In both games, you can pick a direction and go there and find something. But only in Skyrim will you likely find something you'll actually remember. In Starfield, everything is forgettable by design. Next, I want to raise Fallout 4 as a comparison in terms of narrative freedom. Fallout 4 has always caught a lot of flack for the choice to have a fully voiced player character. It's really cool in concept, but in execution is incredibly limiting, as it means that every single quest your character engages in needs to be fully voiced. The options of what your character can say need to be limited. On the dev side, it's such an intense limit that forces all quests to be very intentional in their approach. So basically, you lose the freedom of text-based dialogue that can be changed at any point in the dev cycle without issue. With just NPCs voiced, you could create each quest in sort of a bubble, and all you are concerned with is that one voice actor. But having a VA for the entire game that reacts to every single piece of dialogue in that game meant that either they needed super generic dialogue that would get old fast, or that every piece of dialogue needed to be intentional, limited, and could not be changed later. To Fallout 4's credit, they do the latter. The game is fully voiced in an immersive way. One drawback is that quests don't really adapt depending on your faction standing, since that would introduce far too many variables to ever be a legitimate option, but for what it does surprisingly well, and in many ways strengthens the overall vision of the game's questing system. In the rare moments where the game leans to the former, well, it's noticeably bad and annoying. Just look at all the "another settlement needs your help" memes. It doesn't work, it breaks immersion, it's bad. Starfield does not have a voiced main character, and the quests in that game that are handcrafted are shockingly few. The main quest and faction quests, which amount to around 10 quests for each of the 4 side factions and around 20 quests for the main faction, so in total 60 quests, some of which are shorter than others, that were actually made deliberately to be exactly how they appear in the game. The environments, characters, state of the world, location, everything about these quests were actually designed to appear the way that they appear. What this means is nearly everything else in the game is a Preston Garvey quest. They don't exist in a vacuum, they aren't intentional, they aren't compelling. Instead, they're drag and drop quests to go shoot raiders in space, fly to another planet and shoot raiders. Most of the time it's go shoot raiders. You can tell that this game was designed to be mindless and endless, this fantasy concept of a game where you can just shuffle around enough variables to result in an endless number of fun quests to experience. But with the system, you lose all sense of stakes, everything is completely disconnected from anything outside of these auto-generated quests, they all just blend together into mush. You go from a steak dinner prepared by an actual human to a dollar store steak dinner thrown into a blender to ensure every single bite is as equally bland as the last. So we've established how Starfield's quest system is bland and uninteresting by design and why that doesn't work for a Bethesda game. Now let's compare Starfield to its chief competitor, No Man's Sky, mainly in how the two handle space exploration and base building. First, I want to cover the most obvious. In No Man's Sky, the objective is to explore and discover. Your reason for exploring is to gather resources so you can explore even further. In Starfield, you quest. Your objective is to follow quest markers. You aren't just looking at planets for the sake of finding cool stuff on planets, you're looking at the quest objective on the planet. This reflects in planetary exploration, where in Starfield, every time you land at a random location, it becomes a new, separate, auto-generated instance. You can't spend 2 days walking the entire globe. In No Man's Sky, fast travel is something much more earned by design. Traveling is methodical and it's part of the main gameplay loop. Starfield, the loop is holding down the fast travel button and waiting to be snapped to where the next quest is. This applies to space as well. In No Man's Sky, fuel is a resource you constantly seek to restock. The game is constantly advising you how long it'll take to reach the next objective. Even when light speed jumping, you still have to wait as you actually travel the distance. Starfield has the infamously scrapped fuel mechanic, which has several oddities involved. For one, you can travel as far as you want with no real limits. Weirdly, the game kind of discourages exploring as the handcrafted quests are all contained within a few select systems. Traveling outside of these systems just isn't going to be as rewarding narratively or in terms of the in-game currency or equipment. Secondly, orbital space is entirely manufactured, with the planets you're orbiting really nothing more than a high-quality void for your ship to spin in circles around. You can never get any closer or further away from any of the planets or suns in the distance, so exploration just doesn't even exist in these areas. Essentially, Starfield goes out of its way not only to discourage exploration, but to make pursuing exploration as unfun as possible. I do want to talk about base building a bit in each game as well. In terms of shipbuilding, I have to admit the Starfield shipbuilder is way more fun and way cooler than any of the ship-related stuff that No Man's Sky has to offer. It's a lot like the Gummy shipbuilder from Kingdom Hearts 2, but significantly more in-depth, though both have a similar amount of inconsequentialness to them. In Starfield, your ship largely becomes nothing more than cargo storage. Orbital combat is bland, you can technically target various systems, items on ships, and if you get to that point, you probably already dealt enough damage that it's easier to just click on it and blow it up. Your maneuver options are way too limited to make evasive actions something even worth pursuing. Your fuel systems don't matter since, like I said, it was a scrapped mechanic, so yeah, you can build cool ships, but there's really no reason to other than to give yourself a larger cargo capacity. You can also build bases in Starfield, but for one, the UI is so absent that it becomes a chore even remembering where your base was, along with sitting through all the inconsequential loading screens to visit said base. In No Man's Sky, it's just a matter of dropping a portal and hey, we're back home and ready to get to building. Another drawback is there really isn't any reason to build a base in Starfield. You can only station your companions at bases, if you have the resources to give them a place to be stationed at. You really don't need to gather resources for any reason other than continuing to build. It's just a pointless mechanic. To recall Fallout 4 a bit, in that game bases could be auto-populated and served the purpose of providing you further access to resources and equipment. There's an actual purpose gameplay-wise to spend time doing it. That's a lot closer to how No Man's Sky handles base building. Don't get me wrong, I have a lot of nitpicks with base building in No Man's Sky, but at least there's a point to it. The game is so focused on gathering resources and discovering cool stuff that building a base rewards you with easier access to resources for you to either gather yourself or to auto-gather and collect, as well as just rewarding you with the experience of saying, oh cool, this planet looks pretty, I live here now. That's not even to mention that there is a full, fairly lengthy questline specifically associated with building a base that integrates with the main gameplay focus of exploration so effectively, and anything like that is almost entirely absent in Starfield. Lastly, I just want to compare the main story of Starfield to the main story of Fallout New Vegas a little bit. Note that some of these issues I'll talk about with Starfield are definitely applicable to Fallout 4 or even Skyrim, but I think it's still worth mentioning. Simply put, the main story does not matter beyond forcing you to travel to new locations and meet new NPCs. Agency doesn't really exist, and choices amount to when do you want to do the singular objective you've been given, or for some of the faction quests, either kill or don't kill somebody. It really doesn't matter either way, and you'll never see or hear of that character ever again, aside from the few you can add to your army of companions who do nothing more than repeat a line of dialogue dozens of times, if they even happen to be one of the lucky ones you assign to your ship. It doesn't help that due to the lack of the world building I talked about at the beginning of this video, there's really nothing to establish characters or factions outside of their designated areas. Even NPC companions in New Vegas have Starfield beat, with companions frequently commenting on major story events, which works to not only further flesh out the identities of your companions, but to add a sense of importance to the story at hand. Even if it's just hearing an outside opinion, you're still immediately seeing an impact made by your choices. In Starfield, the best you can really hope for is companions to comment on the fact that enemies are currently nearby. I think the most brutal part of this video is the fact that I haven't even talked about many of the complaints I see about Starfield online. I haven't really talked about the flawed perk system, I didn't talk too much about how the content of the main story is just kind of boring, or how the companions in Starfield pale in comparison to even Skyrim's companions in terms of being compelling even a little bit. And let the record show, I think Skyrim has some really boring companion options. I will say this once again, the gunplay is fun. The shipbuilding, while almost entirely pointless, is fun. There are good aspects in Starfield. It's not a terrible game, but it is one of the most disappointing games I have ever seen, and I hope this will serve as a wake-up call not just to Bethesda and Phil Spencer, Lamau, but to AAA games in general. A game doesn't need to do everything. It's the reason why so many of my favorite games are indie titles. When you have such a small team and such a small budget, you are forced to hyper-focus on what works and do that as good as you can possibly do it. Hollow Knight is just a platformer. Outer Wilds is an exploration game with like 9 locations. Disco Elysium has no real combat. They all stick to just a couple core concepts and execute execute them as flawlessly as possible. Maybe the Elder Scrolls 6 doesn't need to be a settlement building, endlessly generated open world with in-depth cart building that allows for you to ally with all 3 warring factions at once, and every sword you pick up has a plus 7% range and plus 0.3% chance to hit. Maybe it just needs to be a fun world to goof around in for a few hours.